Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Well, today we continue our Evil Elite series where I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes as the Great Awakening continues. And it really is an amazing time where everywhere we look, people, independent researchers are getting the truth out there about these different aspects that we've been lied to by the evil elites, the cabal, Illuminati, whatever you want to call them. People are waking up to the fact that we've been fed this managed agenda. They don't want people thinking critically and doing their own research, and the truth is finally coming out. And this really ties into what I've been focusing on, how important this Epstein list is in terms of being the tip of the iceberg for exposing the global cabal, the financial ties, the political ties, and a spiritual aspect to all this, which we'll get into as we progress through this series, and others are already uncovering the truth and the connections here. But this was the top story this week. We've been waiting for the Epstein list, and again, it was a massive disappointment. So as Ryan Matter, who's done some great documentaries about all the child trafficking stuff and how this connects into this story, he's tweeted here about Pam Bondi and her being the Attorney General back in Florida in 2019 when he was first charged. And now she's the one that's in control of releasing this Epstein list. And there's all these different rumors about why it isn't being released, have the FBI been deleting files, but what we got was really just quite astonishing. And as Eric Weinstein says here, just wow, like how is this the best course to disseminate this information to the public, giving out these highly redacted printouts to a group of influencers, many of whom have got suspected and loyalties and ties to Israel. And this is the big thing. It's the Mossad, Israel intelligence agency, this deep connection that many have suspected and journalists and independent researchers have been exposing for years, that's been heavily redacted in the documents that we did got. So there was nothing new that came out. And as people are pointing out, Trump has been promised to deliver on all these things, but we keep getting these promises of soon. And until we see a single high-profile arrest or whatever, it really seems like we have been duped again. This is why it's so importantly to not align yourself with individuals, but actions and philosophies and morals and values and ethics, that type of thing. So this is another one of Epstein's survivors that got out of this cult, sharing her stories about waking up in a laboratory, and Epstein's obsession with cloning and DNA and transhumanism. And this all ties into that global agenda that I always talk about, that they're pushing and trying to roll out. We know that Epstein had a breeding facility at one of his mansions. So this is pretty deep, twisted stuff that is out there already if you know where to look with the survivors of a lot of this stuff. But this is another interesting document that circulated this week around the ties to Epstein's lawyers and how Epstein was actually a co-founder of the Clinton Global Initiative, which eventually became the Clinton Foundation. And I've spoken at length about the Clintons' involvement in all of this stuff, and particularly advisors to the Clintons like John Podesta. And this is a clip that's been circulating that's pretty dark about John Podesta, where we've had some forensic voice analysis actually matching it up to prove that it is him involved. And you would have seen that clip if you watched a lot of these documentaries exposing this stuff. People asking some hard questions here. Why is the Prime Minister of Israel flying to New York and Epstein Island dozens and dozens of times? We've got more reports coming out here of Israel's Mossad caught spying on the Italian Prime Minister using blackmail for extortion. And that's really what this operation was. Now, we also know that Italy's former president came out and said to one of their main newspapers that they know that the 9/11 attacks were run by the CIA and Mossad, and this was common knowledge amongst the intelligence agencies. So once again, you're not going to hear any of this, I don't think, ever from the mainstream media. But what's happening is the mainstream media is dying a slow death, and a lot of those big companies are already going bankrupt. But the independent media is gaining views and popularity, and information now gets fed through everything from TikTok to podcasts for people with what is really going on. Now, this was another story here in Australia where we had one of our army officers getting stripped of his top secret security clearance because of his loyalties to Israel and Mossad. And he's talking about Zionism being an essential theme to Judaism. And this all ties together, as I said, with everything we know about Epstein, Mossad, the CIA, and who's really being pulling the strings of what's going on, sitting above our politicians and business leaders. This was an interesting clip that circulated about how even Israel, people are waking up within Israel. And this was one of the legislators accusing Netanyahu of being a war criminal and whatever going off in parliament here. So this sort of stuff's coming out. Even members of the Australian Jewish community saying that they just don't support this genocide that's going on in Gaza and rejecting Trump's plan. So good on them. And this is one of the most important points to understand. When we talk about the evil that's going on by the CIA, that doesn't mean all Americans are bad. Or when we talk about Israel and Mossad, that doesn't mean that all Jewish people are bad. We talk about what Albo's doing in Australia, it doesn't mean Aussies are bad. It's the evil elites, and that's where you have to put your focus, because everything else they're doing is that distraction to divide and conquer and have us infighting about all these other little issues without getting to the real culprits behind all this. So Trump tweeted out on Truth Social this AI-generated clip of Gaza and how he's going to take it over and turn into this real estate hub. Trans people in this clip, Trump kicking back with a cocktail with Netanyahu. This is just appalling behavior from a world leader who's saying he's going to be anti-war and bring about peace. Well, there's hundreds of thousands of people dying in Gaza, women and children, this genocide, and you're tweeting this almost sarcastic. I just don't know what else to say here. This is just crazy how Trump can be doing some good things on certain issues, people in his cabinet at least, like RFK Jr., but then this sort of stuff, which is just atrocious, coming out. I want to talk about the ties to Australia. Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, guests of honour in Sydney Harbour Christmas party with Aussie billionaires and so on. So more and more of this is going to keep coming out in Australia. Epstein donating plenty of money to Kevin Rudd, and it's always these NGOs, non-profits and whatever, where we know the money goes through and ends up with other means and in other people's pockets. This is from Ricardo Bossi, who's head of the Australia One Party. He's tweeted out about the ties here to Prince Andrew and Epstein and Catherine Keating, Paul Keating's daughter. So there's some interesting takes on this. Paul Keating was actually someone that pushed back a lot against a lot of the globalist agenda, wars in the Middle East and so on. So you've got to remember, often it's not necessarily these people involved maybe sinister or not, but it's also the fact that they want to gather, evidence and data to be able to blackmail these people if needed in future, whether or not they're already doing that. So plenty to watch in terms of what's happening in Australia. Peter Dutton was in the headlines over his $30 million property portfolio, and also for his insider trading, buying up plenty of shares in all the big four banks right at the bottom of the GFC before the announcements of the bailouts came out. And this all ties back to what we've seen with Nancy Pelosi and all the insider trading that's been exposed by USAID over in America recently. This was a Sydney Northern Beaches MP here being charged with 5 counts of terrible things to children, which I can't say because of the algorithm here. So I think he's appealing these charges, but it seems like more and more of this stuff is just coming out everywhere lately, and particularly in the US, where we seem to have these big sting operations now in full force, where hundreds of children are being rescued and hundreds of the perpetrators are finally being arrested. This was over to Arizona, again, similar thing, plenty of arrests. And it's obviously great to see this sort of stuff isn't in the news at all, particularly here in Australia or the US. How many people know that 37,000 kids a year are reported missing in Australia? That's more than 100 a day. Now, some of those are found for sure, but plenty of them never are. So what's happening? Can you imagine if every night in the nightly news, the Australian host went through the 100 kids missing, and the numbers are similar in the US or Europe? People would wake up and go, how on earth are 100 kids going missing every day? And what's happening here? But these are the things that are obviously covered up because the news networks are owned by the same people that own the corporations, that ultimately at the top of the pyramid, it's all the same people pulling the string. So this is great to see. MPs talking out in European Parliament here about Ukraine being the largest supplier of children for these networks and organ harvesting, all this horrible stuff that's happening. And people are waking up to it. This isn't no longer conspiracy stuff. So sticking to the UK here, where we've had these, the Mayor of London blocking an investigation into all the grooming gangs and everything that's going on there. People are just getting fed up with it, and they're waking up to the fact that not only is there, corruption with their politicians and the elites, but this agenda is actually fully evil. and it's anti-human. It's, they don't want the best for their citizens. It's just gradually taking away your freedoms, putting you in debt, the healthcare stuff, which we'll get to as well. But it's just amazing that this stuff is getting out there and waking more people up. So UK bracing for major strikes, citizens even taking to social platforms declaring they're not going to pay tax anymore. Let's see how that goes. And now to the elections in Germany, where this is the before and after, the party basically saying about how they're going to crack down on the borders, and immigration is a huge problem everywhere in the Western world. We're being flooded with migrants, and it's just, the cultural fit isn't there, and we see crime rates skyrocketing and that type of thing. And as soon as they're elected here, they completely change their tune and say, oh, we never said we're going to close the borders. So a lot of people are very, very angry in Germany right now. This is the election map, which is basically a mirror of the migrant population for who voted for who. And this is the very reason why they're trying to flood these places with migrants. And we see this story time and time again, whether it's, Sweden or Ireland going from the safest places in the world after all this immigration. They're now the most dangerous cities in the world. Violent crime is spiking, and it's just so sad to see this stuff happening everywhere, and really starting in Australia too. So these peaceful protests turn into huge riots. And this is something we need to be cognizant of. This is what the elites want. They want things turning violent, and often they're the ones that are sparking these people to be the antagonists and go in there and cause trouble. And just be aware of that. We're all for peaceful protest, getting the message out there. Using your voice to wake people up. But this is what they want, and this is where they can say, oh, okay, we're going to put in curfews, no one's allowed outside, and this type of thing. So just be aware of that as well. In Australia, as part of this agenda, we're starting to see it as well. Macquarie University telling students that we're settlers and guests in our own country, and this is all part of trying to get you this global agenda of keeping you in a state of fear over every issue. And, you're always in trouble, or you're not welcome here, or you're a guest in your own country, and we have to be more mindful of these people that have just come here that are causing crime and not fitting in, and all this type of thing. It's just insane to see. As I said, all our institutions have been infiltrated by these poisonous ideals. And anti-Australian extremists attempted to behead Captain Cook's statue in the Fitzroy Gardens. And this is what we've seen all over the globe, where they're trying to erase our history, our culture, and basically make us all robots with no opinions, no identity, no one's allowed to be individuals. You're not allowed to speak about what you believe in. You've got to conform to whatever the elites are pushing. So over to Romania, where we saw Carl Georgescu. I've spoken about him a lot on the channel and how important this is to what's happening in Europe. So he's been arrested. This is after the elections were cancelled. There's an absolute army of supporters taking to the streets, estimates of nearly 500,000, demanding the resumption of elections. And there's plenty of evidence to suggest that those elections, were deliberately interfered with by the elites. So if as always, there's a deeper layer to what's going on here. And NATO's trying to build a massive base right on Romania's border with Ukraine. And I keep talking about how pivotal Ukraine is to this entire globalist operation. So this is Mike Benz talking about the CIA's manipulation of Brazil's elections, and people are waking up to the fact that, again, it's the CIA, these intelligence agencies, Mossad, that have overthrown all these governments. I think it's 100 examples we have now where if you don't go with the globalist agenda, you don't want a central bank, you don't want immigration, you're not going to push certain health policies, whatever it is, they come in, disrupt you, start to cause chaos, divide the public, and then eventually overthrow you if they don't just straight up assassinate you. Candace Owens, as always, she's been doing some brilliant work. She was talking about Operation Northwoods and all these planned false flag attacks that JFK refused to sign off on, and eventually he was assassinated. Don't forget, at the time, I've spoken about all the other stuff that he was pushing back against and all the reasons why that did happen. And this is from Australia's intelligence agency. This is Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, calling out this media behaviour of exactly what we're seeing and this attacks on, pushing of the anti-Semitic free speech bill, misinformation bill, and all that stuff. It's just stupid what the media is actually doing, trying to deliberately incite racism in Australia. And it begs the question whether or not Mossad have infiltrated, the Australian media. I don't think there's any question about that, and that's been happening for years. But we've seen continue here right now in our own backyard these false flag attacks, like we saw at the cafe the other week, and all these things that are just trying to incite racism, divide you, get people angry, and distract you over what's really happening. This is the Bibas family who are threatening now to sue the Israeli government for exploiting the deaths of their family for propaganda purposes as the layers of evidence to support the claims that it was actually an Israeli airstrike that killed them. And this all ties back into what happened on October 7th and how, Israel has the right to defend itself, which has paved the way for this war that's gone on for more than a year now, which is just genocide and ties into what the Trump stuff I touched on before as well. Now, one of the positives is that we do actually have this joint peace agreement for rare earth metals that seems to be happening between America and Russia, two superpowers. So, look, it's great that we want peace in this region. We want peace everywhere as people wake up to what's really going on. And this was an interesting piece by a Russian foreign minister talking about back in 2022 when they nearly had this peace deal, but it was Boris Johnson that stopped Ukraine from signing. And we know the profitability of war, but it's more this other stuff, these other layers of what's happening in Ukraine that's really important to understand. So Trump's shut down any possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, which again is a positive if you want to take steps towards this war ending. And this is actually a Ukrainian MP calling for the emergency session on the impeachment of Zelensky in the Oval Office. And it was pretty crazy this week just to see that, the meeting between Trump and Zelensky really felt like just all theatre and JD Vance. So still not sure what to make of it. A lot of it just feels staged and fake. And again, to create media headlines, different agendas and that type of thing. Albo's here in Australia talking about how we're going to continue to support and defend their sovereignty against the brutality of Russian aggression, international law. And as I pointed out, it's the money laundering, the biolabs, the child trafficking, all the stuff that the USAID documents have revealed. And NATO agreed not to push further east after World War II and all these agreements, and they continue to do so. So is it any surprise that once they get on the border of Russia that Russia want to protect those Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine? And again, this story is far deeper than what the media is telling you. Another interesting tidbit here from Australia, we've continued to see this implementation of the recognition of overseas degrees for education and employment. So we're already flooded with immigrants and temporary visa holders. But the other thing I want you to understand here is that education is one of the big pillars of the Australian economy. Yes, the housing market and the banking bubble, we know, the mining, which has really allowed us to have this amazing run, recession-free for 3 decades. But education is a huge pillar. So why we're starting to let in all these other people, other countries, and recognize these degrees, it's almost like undoing ourselves as one of the education capitals and one of the best places to get degrees if we're just going to start letting all these other countries in. And I spoke about in previous episodes how rife it is with the forgeries and the faking of these qualifications in these other countries. So you might get a doctor that comes here who's actually just forged their documents, which is just, again, crazy stuff what's happening in Australia. Interesting tweet here from Craig Kelly talking about how the US and Trump have just passed this No Censors on Our Shores Act, talking about how any other countries that engage in effort to censor free speech would be deemed unlawful, not allowed into the US. Maybe they get their funding and tariffs, all these other measures that Trump seems to be putting on places that are cracking down on free speech. So again, it's just super interesting to watch him be doing some positive things and some really, really unintelligent things in other regions. Next bit of news here is the reports that the Pope has died. And this is a whole nother kettle of fish that I'm not going to get into deeply today, but a lot of our religious institutions have obviously been compromised. And I think there's a lot more to this story that's going to come out maybe after the Pope is confirmed to be dead. Trump's going over to the UK to meet with King Charles again on the 4th of March, which is just 2 days away. So I think we're going to get some huge news in regards to the Pope, the Catholic Church, and the ties to the child trafficking stuff, the Vatican, and all that coming out as well. If you haven't been down these rabbit holes and watched these documentaries, the symbolism is really key to all this stuff in terms of the serpent worship, the evil worship, and going down those rabbit holes as well, which we just see everywhere today. It was the Olympics for a lot of people that woke people up in that opening ceremony. Carnival, as I said here, this is another great video by one of our favorites on TikTok and Instagram, who's got millions of followers now, who's just been doing this attention-catching videos to reveal the truth about these conspiracy theories as well, Jan Bergman. So check him out if you haven't already. This is a good interview and a good website to really, for those of you that are still, I guess, on the border whether or not this is true and all this type of thing, there's now, dozens and dozens of survivors that have escaped these this satanic ritual abuse, these evil cults, and are telling their stories and telling about what really goes on under the Vatican, under those tunnels in New York, all these types of things, the castles of the rich and powerful and the royals and all these type of things. So amazing these are hard listens a lot of the time, but as I said, once you know the truth, knowledge is power, and you start to see the world very differently and live your life in a different way once you realize what's really going on and behind closed doors with all the elites. Okay, so let's get into some health stuff now. This is from Wuhan, where apparently they've begun work on another COVID virus here. Again, we know that all this stuff is happening, gain of function research. Hopefully we continue our efforts to defund it and shut it all down. And that appears to be happening. Again, the US has stopped their funding of the World Health Organization, and apparently it's facing collapse without all this funding. Who were the planners of the pandemic and the pusher of the solutions when this all took place. But Robert F. Kennedy, RFK Jr., continues to do some amazing work. He's just halted this study just days before it was about to go ahead with this new oral COVID vaccine trial. The most worrying thing for me remains Elon Musk and maybe even Trump's position. Trump hasn't spoken a lot lately, if he's still pro or anti this mRNA technology. And people like Elon that think in terms of AI and computers are just thinking of, our DNA and our biology is something that you can just upgrade, and playing God, interfering with nature, that type of thing. So Elon even admits that he had heart troubles and whatever. So the fact that he's saying, yeah, I had heaps of issues, I know heaps of people have had heaps of issues, but this is just a great thing that's going to end up curing cancer. And for those of you that have been down the health rabbit hole, you know that cancer is the expression of your body, some other illness. Just like when you mow the lawns and cut the weeds, if you don't pull them out at the root, they keeps coming back. And it's the same with our health conditions. You have to get to the root cause of what's causing it. And I'm going to talk about that more in future videos as well. As someone that's done a pharmacy degree and has spent hundreds of hours researching natural remedies and plant medicine as well. Okay, so this was a video that went viral about this AI robot that attacked a crowd at the Chinese festival. So when, Elon's talking about how great AI is and putting chips in all our brains with Neuralink, and he's got this Starlink network, he's got these AI self-driving cars. This is the total control that is very, very worrying, particularly with him being unelected and really looking like he's pulling the strings for Trump in a lot of ways with everything that's going on at the moment. But another positive, we're starting to see US fast food chains ban or transition away from the use of seed oils, which we know contribute to a lot of harm in the body, which RFK, again, has been a big pusher for. So let's hope that more restaurants and food chains and supermarkets start waking up to how bad seed oils are. And this is a good example that I just wanted to share. This is a pharmacist that's been talking about some of these things that have come out in USAID and the wasteful cost that taxpayers are bearing. So some of these medications that might cost $14, Medicare and the system ends up paying $500. So once you do the math on how many prescriptions of all these different things are being filled every year. It's hundreds of millions of dollars being wasted for taxpayers. And this is where I think we can get to a place where people don't pay tax, which happens, not that long ago in a lot of countries. And people say, oh, you have to pay tax for the roadworks and the hospitals. Well, what USAID has shown is that the hundreds of billions of dollars are all being funneled to these NGOs and into politicians and influencers' back pockets and that type of thing. So, most of our tax money is actually gone to waste. It doesn't go to the things that we supposedly are paying for the good of the community and yourself. Ozempic, another very, very topical drug. RFK talking to Congress about just, I've spoken about how this causes loss of bone mineral density, muscle loss, all these other things. So you appear to be losing weight on the scales, but a lot of harms are done from this as well. And $3 trillion a year would be the cost to get all 74% of obese Americans onto this drug, where we need to be getting them towards organic food, exercise, healthy habits. As again, spirituality is a big part of all this as well, which we'll get into more. But there's plenty of ways to be healthy other than taking these shortcuts made by machines in labs. All right, so the measles outbreak, I touched on this last week, and I said the media was going to blow this out of proportion. So we've had the first measles death in America in a decade. I spoke last week about vitamin A and how a lot of those outbreaks decades ago happened in places with children that were malnourished. But we need to really focus on what's important here and the reality of these numbers. So this is the 10-year rolling average of measles cases in the US. And I think RFK even said this in a speech that, we've had, I think, maybe 4 deaths this year. But, it's just so minuscule. It's compared to everything else going on, all these other epidemics, heart disease in young people, the opioid epidemic, and all these other things that you could be focused on. Whereas the media loves to blow this up and blow this out of proportion. But not only that, we've got some reports that the actual measles, mumps, rubella vaccine was given to children with measles. And this is a massive no-no, a massive contraindication. When your immune system's already under stress and battling, you do not want to give these things which cause the body to create a response, as well as all these other adjuvants that are in these injections that we now know can really upset your immune system. And this is a whistleblower, Dr. Thompson, talking about how he was emailing and getting in touch with the CDC, and they were trying to cover up the fact that these symptoms were known to the CDC a long time ago. So if you haven't watched these documentaries, this trilogy is amazing. I'm not sure if it's on YouTube, but you can definitely find it on Rumble, BitChute, Odyssey, X, all these platforms which don't censor. This was a good little clip from a doctor here talking about the science behind how these heavy metals and other adjuvants get into our body and surpass the blood-brain barrier, which isn't fully developed in kids until the age of 7. And this is why I think a lot of people with these nanoparticles that we now know were in the jabs recently, a lot of people talking about how they've had brain fog and just not feeling the same ever since. I'm going to get to some of the solutions for that as well in just a second. But this was RFK talking about similar things here, where they had $100 million to do a food study a while back. And what they found was when you inject these rats with the aluminium adjuvants from the Hep B vax, that you could give it to a rat with a peanut molecule or other foods that they ate within the next few days after getting these injections, and it would actually develop a permanent peanut allergy. So when you think about how rife childhood allergies are now, but in the West that have the highest vaccine schedules, I think it's one of the questions that we need to be asking and getting more science around it. Now, I think it's multifactorial. I think all the pesticides, herbicides, and things that are destroying our gut all play a part in your immune system as well. But this is what you want to do, guys. You want to get your immune system firing on all cylinders and being as healthy as you can, because we know that these things are everywhere now in our environment, particularly here in Australia, where we're now seeing the highest number of early onset cancers in the world. 135 out of every 100,000 people, higher than New Zealand. And we know that Australia has, sticks to all the full childhood schedule, which is now up to 75 doses, as well as we had the strictest mandates and probably highest in terms of levels of people being boosted and that type of thing in this country as well. So it's really sad as we continue to see all these excess deaths come through. Now, I reported last week the ABS has stopped reporting excess death data, but they still give us the total statistics. So you can kind of work out, well, what was happening pre-COVID and what are the numbers now and just how significant this jump is and how much it exceeds immigration growth and those baseline numbers as well. So great to see this sort of stuff getting out there and good people reporting this. There's plenty of doctors that are fighting the good fight. You know, one thing that amazes me is some of the doctors that I try to share this with that are still just fully in the matrix, they don't realize that medicine, you know, I did the pharmacy degree. I worked on the front lines. Big Pharma has now captured the funding for the studies, the funding for the institutions, the funding for the education, and you know, profits go first. So this is all part of the same system. So when these people go, oh, you know, we need a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study before I'd even consider it, you're never going to get that evidence because they're never going to fund that type of study. So it's up to these doctors that are waking up and these people. You know, completely hats off to Professor Ian Brightthorpe. He broke down on stage apologising to the Australian public for what we've done and, you know, and what we've learnt from the truth with the Pfizer redacted documents and all these independent labs that are showing, well, what was in these things and whatnot. So this is Dr. John Campbell on YouTube, who's been amazing. And as I said, Professor Ian Breitbart talking about just how crazy this gene therapy was that a lot of people got forced into taking. So solutions. This is the recommended spike protein detox protocol by Dr. Peter McCullough that was published in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons 2 years ago now. So nanokinase made from fermented soybeans, been around forever, safe. Bromelain, again, from enzyme from pineapples, been around forever, anti-inflammatory, and curcumin from turmeric. So again, these safe natural products can help break down the spike protein, get rid of inflammation, just help your body detox, as well as fasting is probably the other big one that I'd recommend for people to, particularly if you can get into multi-day fasts, to break down the nasties in those different cells that need to be turned over naturally by the body. I will do a full dedicated episode on everything health related in the future if you guys are interested. But a couple of final articles to touch on just the craziness that I warned about was coming to Australia over the last couple of years. A Sydney Local Woman of the Year being given to a man as they push this transgender ideology on our kids and into schools and so on. 3 million temporary visa holders in Australia now in the middle of a housing crisis while they're prioritising, the government handouts to these immigrants versus looking after the everyday Australians, more and more of which can't afford somewhere to live or healthy food and the basics. And this all ties into what I want to finish with, the fear-based model. They're trying to keep everyone in fear. And again, knowledge is power. Understand this stuff. Start to make the changes in your life so that you're not in the matrix. Okay, living your own life, getting back in touch with nature, getting in touch with yourself. Stop listening and bowing down to external authority in any institution. Okay, and this study was really interesting to me in terms of the lowest serotonin causing anxiety spikes. And we now know 75% of teens say they're depressed or anxious or mental health issues. So for those of you that don't know, I've got a bit of a theory around dopamine and serotonin being a bit of the yin and the yang within the body. And our society has made dopamine, the basis. People wanting more, greed, all these addictions, whether it's, porn, money, whatever, versus serotonin, which is the molecule of, kind of gratitude and connection and relationships and love and that type of thing. And so it's pretty clear that people have just lost the ability to connect and that type of thing. And so for me, when we're starting to see this evidence in the science about, if you've got good connection and good relationships and all that type of thing in your life and eating healthy and not seeking all this dopamine and constant short-term fixes and you're not addicted to your smartphone, these are the things that cause the anxiety and the depression and the fear, which the elites want. This is what they're trying to get you, keep you trapped in that matrix, keep your time poor, not being able to think for yourself. So guys, this is the number one thing I'd encourage you to do. Start questioning everything, doing your own research. How do you become the best version of yourself? Because I think things are going to get chaotic in a lot of ways as we go through these changes. But as long as we can wake people up, I think humanity and this great awakening, we can head to an amazing place, a completely different time, and something that we haven't really had before. This is the first time that people have really woken up to the depth of the control of the deep state and that the evil elites, the cabal, whatever you want to call them. So guys, if you're enjoying this series, please share these videos around on your socials. Wake other people up that might not be as awake as you are on this journey. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and I'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.